Good morning. Good morning. This is Binyam on the Checkin In podcast. This is episode number 89. Today is November the 4th, 2011. Welcome to today's episode. My intro is doing a little bit of a funky thing as it tries to sort its way through a little hiccup there. But I am thrilled to note. Hello, Fahin. How are you? Hello, Andy. Good to see you guys coming in there. It's fantastic when you can keep on going with the show, even though technology is like doing its typical sort of fluctuation. Sometimes it's saying, I want to play along or I don't want to play along. I know sometimes 2011, did I say 2011? Let me try that again. February the 4th, 2021. Oh my goodness. Thank you for the catch there. That's awesome. Let's try that again. February the 4th, 2021, not 2011. My goodness, that was a flashback to the past. On the Checkin In podcast, we like to, hey, Adam, how are you? This is not a new job. This is my podcast that I've been featuring for the last few months, every weekday morning, I should say, where we focus on three key things in the endeavor to grow to be better versions of ourselves through asking self-reflection questions. And as we ask those self-reflection questions, I consider the question itself, I answer it. I encourage you guys to participate along the way to see how you guys are also evolving over time. And so that's the basic premise of why we spend this half hour together. There are three key pillars that we'd like to focus on the Checkin In podcast, which my regular listeners are familiar with. That's 1, awareness, 2, kindness, and 3, happiness. These three things are super important for me personally in the way that I see myself growing and evolving over time. So along those lines, I like to be able to bring some focus to them in my own personal life. And as I do that with a disciplined focus every day, it is one of those things that helps me do almost like a self-checkup every day as I engage my world, as I engage life as it's coming at me. And I think this is really helpful and important because in the absence of doing so, we sort of end up at destinations that weren't what we had wanted or wished. So glad to have you guys joining in this morning for the 89th episode, regardless of technology and how it's and how it is trying to sort itself out. The substance remains the same. Today's question we are focusing on goes as follows. What's the most spontaneous thing you've ever done? What's the most spontaneous thing you've ever done? And how did it make you feel? I like both parts of this question here, and I'll tell you why in just a couple of moments. But I was just thinking about how I'm getting down to the bottom of my list of 100 questions. I think this was a list of 100 questions in total. I'm coming down towards the end of it. So 89. We got about 10 more days in this current list of questions that I've been going through the last few months. And as I've been going through these questions and answering them for myself, there have been questions that I've relished. There have been questions that I enthusiastically answer, and I can't wait to share some of my insights or thoughts or experiences on them. And then there were questions that I was saying, I'm going to just put this one here for later and later. And I procrastinate on those questions because those ones are like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to say about this question here. I don't know what I think about it. I'm not sure what my response would be. I haven't really thought about this one here from this angle. And so these are the questions now that I'm getting to that make me feel tremendously uncomfortable. Tremendously uncomfortable in the sense that I'm like, oh, I have no idea what to be able to reflect on in this question. But nonetheless, I have made a commitment personally that I'm going to walk through all of these questions. I'm going to seriously consider all of them. I'm going to try and appropriate them for myself. One of the things I found in the outcome of this discipline of going through the questions, even if I didn't resonate with them or like them per se, is that as I go into these questions, I find there's some benefit that I derive personally where I'm like, oh, even though I didn't like the theme or the place that that question was directing me, in the outcome, it was something really helpful for me. It was helpful by way of insight, growing an awareness of myself, learning to be kind to myself, perhaps as well. So this is that season where I am in the midst of those questions, and so yeah. Hope you guys are doing well this Thursday today. Oh, Goodness, this week continues to progress very quickly. So it's Thursday today. I hope you are doing well this Thursday morning or afternoon, wherever you're listening in, whatever time frame it is, as you're tuning into this broadcast. I hope things are well for you. And if they're not, just a reminder that this is kind of what life is like, right? Hello, Ollie. This is what life is like in a sense that we are. How can I say this? It is a guaranteed that we are going to experience challenges along the way. It's a guarantee in life that we are like things are not going to go according to our schedule. And in the midst of those challenges, the question is, how do we sort of roll with it? How do we navigate and move forward in a way that reflects that element of acknowledgement that it doesn't happen on our schedule? And in the midst of it not happening on our schedule, how can we acknowledge the things that we are able to still direct and control in our lives while making space for the things that are beyond our control and saying, okay, here it is, right? So, yes, glad to have you guys joining in this morning and being a part of this. Again, the question we're answering today is, what's the most spontaneous thing you've ever done? How did it make you feel? This is one of those questions I saved for the end because I was like, I have no idea what to talk about this because I sometimes my memory is terrible. I remember like really impacting moments in my past, but sometimes the details sort of get glazed over, and so I have to think really hard about this question. And even now, I think I have an idea of what it might be, but I'm not sure if that's the most spontaneous thing I've done. Actually, I'd say it's probably the initiating factor and the most spontaneous thing I've done. So that might be a start. That might be a starting point. I have two things I can share with you. So let's look at the question first and consider the merits of this question. What's the most spontaneous thing you've ever done? This is, of course, a question that's taking us into our past by way of remembering a story, remembering an incident, remembering a scenario. And as we do this, I think one of the helpful things about why I appreciate going into my past and perusing my memories is it gives me an awareness of how I'm changing over time, which is a good thing. As I look into my past, as I reflect my past, I say, okay, here's what went on back there. And I'm seeing that past moment from the present moment and what happens in my periphery is a comparison or a contrast that I have access to now, saying, here's where I'm at, reflecting on what happened in the past over here. And as I reflect on this past moment here, what is the difference here between me then and me now? And do I like that difference? Do I like the way in which it has gone over time? That's a really helpful thing, I think, right? And so I really value that component of contrast or comparison that enables me to say, here's what once happened back here. Here's where I'm at right now. And here's how I'm continuing to move forward as I move into my future. That's the awareness piece that acknowledges what happened. And it's kind of cool. Sometimes past memories are fun and great. Sometimes they're kind of painful and still uh, are clothed in emotions that we may find challenging. And so it's always an adventure, it seems to me, when we have the opportunity to go into our past and reflect and say, there's what happened there. I see you past. And here's how I'm processing that evolution. So, as I look into my past, what's the most spontaneous thing I've ever done? That's the part that gets me. Is like, okay, this is the most spontaneous thing ever, not just any moment that you can remember, but the most impacting ones. And so that's why I've been struggling with this question is thinking, were those the most impacting? They're pretty significant in the fact that I can still remember them. So I'm going to say, yes, they still count. The most spontaneous thing. I like how these questions take us to the threshold of here's the most spontaneous, not just what is a spontaneous thing, but it's like what's the most spontaneous thing. I do this in my personal life continually, where I bring extreme comparisons when I'm trying to figure something out. So, for example, if I'm faced with an option, what I'll usually do with that option is I'll think on either side, what's the worst thing that could happen here? And what's the best thing that can happen? Because within that spectrum there, I can say somewhere in the middle here is what my experience is going to be, and that's an okay thing for me. I like especially giving more time on the what's the worst case scenario as I consider the spectrum, because when I think of the worst case scenario, I'm preparing myself the best that I can to respond to and engage whatever scenario or circumstance that I'm in. Because if I just consider the best case scenario, that's the easy part. But what most of us struggle with, I found in my experience, is that we never really calibrate for the worst case scenario. Does that make sense? So if I can prepare for the worst case scenario, I can prepare for everything now because it's all covered, right? And so that's how it makes sense to me. Here in Canada, we have actually six. We have six different levels for a driver's license. The sixth one is kind of like it's on the periphery. It's like for your motorcycle license. So that's still important. But everyone usually has the class five. Once they pass the driving test, they're on the class five. And then four for those who are driving Uber, taxi, limousines. Three for those who are driving like dump trucks. Two for those who are driving buses, and then number one for those who are. Actually, three is also for emergency vehicles. Two for buses, and then class one is for those who are driving the big semis and rigs. Mimo, we're talking about what's the most spontaneous thing you've ever done. How did it make you feel? And so the way it works now is if you have your class five, you can only drive class five. If you have your class four, you can drive both class four vehicles and class five. If you have your class three, you can drive anything below that, right? If you have your class two, which is what I have, you can drive anything underneath that. So I can drive emergency vehicles, dump trucks, I can drive limousines, taxis, and of course any regular vehicle. Class one is the one that most usually have when they're driving the big semis or the big trailers. And so those guys are qualified to drive any of these ones here. And I mentioned that analogy just as a way of saying when I plan for the worst case scenario, I can cover everything from the worst case to the best case scenario in any circumstance. And that's why I prepare for the worst case scenario. I try to go for the one that gives me the most adaptability in covering all of the bases. If I only planned for the best case scenario, I'm very limited in what happens, and usually life happens, right? This is, for example, what happened to me in my when I was a teenager graduating high school. Me and my peers, we said, "Hey, this is amazing! We're gonna go into the world. We're gonna have amazing experiences in the world." And maybe I'll answer that in just 1 second. I was about to go into the world with all these amazing expectations. I was going to get the dream job that I had. Um, you know, I was going to establish something for myself. Most of us have found, however, that as we went into the real world, we'd only plan for the best case scenario, but in reality, life throws a whole bunch of challenging circumstances that sort of thwart and slow down what our best case scenario is. And for most of us, we may not even experience our best case scenario. We just have to make some changes along the way. So this is why I believe now that for me personally, I want to plan for the worst case scenario, and then in planning for the worst case scenario, I cover all of the bases. Mimo was asking, are you still thinking about becoming a truck driver? I don't know, like if there's a position open that way, I wouldn't mind that, I think. But, Mimo, let me put it this way. My desire is to take on a job right now that still helps me meet my economic needs while still giving me time to do what I do with you guys and creating content and trying to encourage and inspire you in your own context and seeing you go from point A to point B. That's my desire, Mimo. And so whatever enables me to have that space to be able to do that is what I'm saying a hell yes to. If the job requirements means that I'm not going to be able to do what I do with you guys, then I'll say no. It might be an amazing job, but I'm not like I'm very careful, Mimo, about what I commit to myself to in life, career wise. Mohammed, thank you, thank you, Mohammed. Um, and so that's what's really important for me is making sure that I'm spending my life in a way that meets my values. I don't want to just go into a career that locks me away from what I believe my purpose is, and that is, Mohammed, to encourage and inspire people in their own context because of the ones that I've gone through. So that's what I look for. And so truck driving, if there's a position that enabled me to be on the road long periods of time where I can make videos while I'm on the road or, do different things along the way that enabled me to continue to make content, I'd be a hell yes. Um, that's what I'm really looking for in my job context. Thanks for the question. So the most spontaneous thing I've ever done, how it did it make me feel? I like that second part of the question because, hey, here's a spontaneous thing. It doesn't always mean that it's a good spontaneous thing. Maybe you had to make the spontaneous choice out of a situation that you were not thrilled about, right? Maybe that's the case. I do not know. But regardless, whatever that looks like, that spontaneous event, how did it make you feel, gives us that opportunity now to do that awareness piece again of what was going on as we were responding to it. One of the things I've noticed as I've talked to friends and people in general is when they're recounting very emotional experiences, they'll usually stay away from describing the emotional part. They'll just say, here's what happened and here's what, transpired sequentially. But they'll rarely ever say, but this is how it made me feel. And so it takes a bit more work for me to get to that point with them and saying, but tell me, how did this make you feel? What was going on in your heart, in your mind? How did you respond at the gut level? Give me some of the emotions, because that's where the real flavor and color comes out in that story. And that's why I appreciate that is included in today's question. How did it make you feel? So you went and experienced this spontaneous thing, unexpected, of course, right? And as you experience this spontaneous and unexpected scenario, how did it make you feel? So I'm going to try to reflect on that too. So a good, well-rounded question to be certain. And I have two things off the top of my mind that I can reflect on. And yeah, I'm happy to roll with those. So there might be a third one that comes along the way. My first one was when I, on my own, spent a lot of money at one point in time. And it was a scary thing for me. I was like, oh, this is uncomfortable. So I was working on the oil rigs up north in Alberta. This may be about 15, 16, no, maybe two decades ago now, I'd say. Maybe. Yeah. Anyway, it was quite some time ago. And I was working up in Edmonton. So that's about 3 hours north of here. But my rig work took me way up into the far north, cold and barren, and it was, yes. Hello, Natasha. How are you? Question again for those coming in is, what's the most spontaneous thing you've ever done? How did it make you feel? So I'm recounting my story where I was working on the rigs up north, and I was on a few days off back in the city of Edmonton. And one of the things I thought that would really help me for what I was doing at the time, because I was doing a lot of reading and studying of like deep tomes, but I needed a really good computer, and I didn't have a computer. I needed a really good computer because the kind of work that I was doing was the kind of work that it takes up a lot of space on a device. It takes up a lot of space. I needed a computer that had lots of space and had fast operating system. That's what I needed. So I went into a computer store. I think it was a Best Buy or something similar back then. I went into the store and I started looking at the computers, and I told them I want the best of the best. And they said, well, the best of the best by way of fastest operating system and greatest storage capacity. In our laptop selection, they took me to the gaming computers. Like, these are the high-end back then, high-end gaming computers. These are the ones that gamers usually use because you need that kind of really quick response as you're doing these complex video games that have a lot going on, right? And so they were saying these are the ones that you need because these are the ones that keep up with the games and the systems and all that kind of stuff back then. Now, for my part, I've never really been into video games. I've never been into them just because I'm not very good at them. The extent of my familiarity just goes to like Mario Kart. I love Mario Kart. That's a fun one. Today's question, Ross, good morning, is, what's the most spontaneous thing you've ever done and how did it make you feel? Good morning, by the way, my friend. And so as I was, yeah, I've never been into video games. I was going to buy this amazing laptop. It's super expensive, that I think it's like 4 grand. Whew, that was like, yeah, that's a chunk of change. I remember my third one now. Yes, I remember what it is. Okay. So as I went into the computer store to buy this computer, they were like, yeah, what kind of games do you play? And I said, I don't play. They're like, then why are you getting this really high-end computer that can handle amazing games? This is why people buy this computer, is because it's a gaming computer. It's got storage and it's got space. I said, because I need space for my encyclopedias that I read through and my research documents and all that kind of stuff that takes up a lot of space, because these things aren't in text form. These are like so old. These manuscripts that I've been reading for my grad studies that I was interested in, these are so old that they don't even come in print, like they're not typed. They're like um, PDF images of scanned pages of like old script, old English script, and other languages that I have to learn how to decipher because it's so old, and it's like, and it takes up a lot of space. And they're like, so you're buying a gaming computer for research? And I was like, yeah. Hello, Kyle. Welcome aboard. How are you? And so they're like, that does not make sense, but hey, who are we? So that was one of the most spontaneous things that I remember in my earliest reflection. I remember a few more episodes now, but I'm going to limit my storytelling to three key events. So yes, I bought this gaming computer, which is like 4 grand. That was a huge investment, and as I paid for that, like that's one of the most spontaneous things I'd done because I didn't think I'd be buying at this level, but I'm like. I need to do this for this purpose over here so I can continue my studies because I was such a nerd back then. And yeah, I was scared. Like, how did it make me feel? It made me feel really scared. I was like, is this a really wise choice that I should be doing right now? Should I be sinking like this much money in this endeavor just so I can facilitate my studies? That was a scary decision for me. I was like, "Ugh," like your heart's beating, and I was scared about it because I was like, I've never done this before. This is unusual for me to like take this huge chunk of change here and invest it in one device right here, which could easily get stolen or broken. And so that made me feel really, really uncertain and scared when I bought that. I remember taking it out. Of course, there was excitement as well too. There was excitement, but with that excitement was that sense of guilt as well in the background of my mind saying, should I have just done that, or was this a decision that I'm going to regret later? I did not know at the time. It turned out to be like a really fantastic decision, and I'm glad I made it in the aftermath. But it was definitely wrapped up in this sense of, did I just do something that I'm going to regret? Right? Let me tell you my second experience. My second experience was when I bought my Okay, let me tell you a bit of backstory. While I was out on the rigs working, I'm anxious to end about big changes, says Natasha, but my scary decision was totally changing careers, moving away from family and my kids, and moving my kids across the country. That is amazing. So, yeah, you were on the one side of the country here, and then you moved over to this side over here. I admire you for that, Natasha, just because I remember, yeah, that's the story when you were telling me, and that is a scary thing to like displace your family away from everything that you know to be familiar and comfortable. And even while you're here, it hasn't been easy. I know you well enough that you've had some significant challenges while you've been out here, and I really admire what you and your family have done that way. So thanks for sharing that, Natasha. That's awesome. Hello, Dawit. How are you, my friend? Good to see you coming on here. Second experience that I found really spontaneous and how it made me feel was when I was working on the rigs. I was driving a Volkswagen Jetta, Volkswagen Golf. Those are my vehicles because I loved Volkswagens at the time. But I'd always been on the lookout for a Volkswagen car that was run on diesel. Why? Because I had some fond memories in Africa when I lived there of a Volkswagen vehicle that was diesel, and I'd always loved the sound of the engine. But I could never find them here because everyone loves these vehicles. They are very high value. They last like many kilometers, and so yeah, I found it difficult to find a diesel powered Volkswagen, like an older car. So I just had the gas powered ones. And why I wanted a diesel one is because when you're working on the rigs, the boys up there usually drive these big honking trucks, right? They make lots of money to buy these big trucks. And as they're as they're driving in these big trucks, they're able to fill their gas tanks they're able to fill their gas tanks from the diesel reservoir of the rig. So it's like free gas for them. And I always envied these guys who are able to do this, just fill up their gas tank, whereas I had to go and buy my gas. So one day, actually, yeah, that was when I was on the rigs. But then after I finished my work on the rigs, I went back tree planting. And while I was tree planting, we were about to go on a contract for this job, and it was the kind of job where once you're out there, they call it isolation camp, which means you kind of are stuck there until you get the contract done. And the night that, oh no, the weekend that was before we were supposed to go, I discovered my Volkswagen. The trunk was locked in a way that the key couldn't unlock it. It was just the locking mechanism was kind of jammed or something. So all of my gear was inside the back of the trunk. So I told my foreman saying, "Hey, listen, I can't go out with you guys to the camp because I got to stay and get my car fixed." He wasn't too happy about that because that meant it'd be a delay. But he said, "Okay, you can come and follow us afterwards, but we're going to go on ahead." And the thing was, no personal vehicles were allowed there because they wanted to make sure everyone stayed there with the company trucks to get the job done. So me staying behind was significant because I got to bring my personal vehicle because I had to get it fixed. And I had to get it fixed on the Monday because this is a weekend. They were leaving on Monday morning, but they couldn't wait for me because they had to get the job started. So I stayed behind on Monday morning to take it to the dealership when it opened up. So while I took my vehicle to the dealership to get it opened up, the trunk that is, because the mechanism was broken. I took a walk through their sort of junkyard where they have their parts cars, and I saw this um, beautiful Volkswagen Jetta, and I said, "That's a beautiful car." It's like one of the ones I'd have been looking for and wanting. So I went over to look on the inside dash, and there it was. It said diesel. I'm like, "Oh, what's wrong with this car? There doesn't seem to be anything wrong." So I went inside and asked one of the salesmen, saying, "That car in your junk pile there, what's wrong with it?" He said, "Nothing's wrong with that one. We just got that one in." Hello, Abdir. He said, "Nothing's wrong with this vehicle. We just got this vehicle into the lot, and we haven't even had a chance to check it up or figure out how much we're going to sell for." I said, "I would like to buy it." They're like, "But we haven't even done anything." I'm like, I'd like to buy it. I'd like to put a deposit in on that car." They're like, "Okay." And so I put a deposit. That was my second spontaneous thing I've ever done. It was scary because I was like, I don't know what I'm signing up for. Is this the right decision? Because now I'm going to have two cars, and yet I went ahead with it, and it was fantastic. It was fantastic. It was the most beautiful car I've ever bought. Finally got to drive a Volkswagen Jetta that was diesel powered, and oh, I love the sound of the engine. It was a pleasure to drive. And there's a whole other story with that spontaneous moment, but that made me feel excited, but also scared again, saying, "Oh, this is another investment of money here that I'm not sure I'm comfortable with, but I know I want this." And so that was the second one. And there's a theme here with all of my spontaneous moments. They all involve huge expenditures. My third one was when I chose to buy my dream instruments. I'd played trumpet, as you probably know. I played trumpet for years, and I'd always had just student models. So I was at the point about over 2 decades ago when I said, I think this is a serious enough investment for me in life now that I want to buy I want to buy my dream instruments, my professional dream instruments. And I want it to be unique. So not a normal trumpet, but I wanted to get a pocket trumpet, which is a normal trumpet, but just squeezed in with more bends in the tubing so that it comes about to, yeah, just right in front of you. It's like a stubby. I'll feature it for you guys. It's over in my room right now. Nonetheless, nonetheless, I started looking online for the prices. The top of the line was this, I don't know, $8,000 model, handcrafted a year in advance by these really, yeah, these guys know their craft well. And then the cheapest one was made by these cheap Chinese companies where they basically fall apart as you're blowing into it. And so it's like, yeah, not that one. So I looked everywhere between the cheapest model and the most expensive. And I ended up going for the most expensive one. And I was like, crap. And I remember the scariness of that. I even got like a whole certificate showing that this is an authentic Marcinko's pocket trumpet. And it's been so much fun. I've loved it. It was an investment to be certain, but it was another spontaneous decision that I made in the moment. I'm like, I'm going to go for that one. And I've made the payment. And oh, yeah, there's that sense of dread, that sense of, did I just do the right thing? Because I don't live at this level, right? And so these are some of the decisions that have been spontaneous for me. And the consistency that I see in them is that they all involved huge expenditures in a way that I was uncomfortable with, but I went ahead with it. Secondly, it has to do with investments in me, like my computer, my vehicle, my trumpet. These were investments that I had already indulged in and said, I love this and I want to continue to see myself growing as I use these things. These were tools for me. And as I went through them, as I experienced those, it was really interesting because I had, as I indulged in them and used them, there was still that sense of guilt saying, was that the best use of my money? Was that the best use of my resources? Is this the right time? Like there's just lots of second guessing, right? And so I'm aware that as I was reflecting on those experiences back then, I never gave myself permission to be kind to myself and saying, hey, this is a good choice. You made the right choice. Be a hell yes in this moment and enjoy for all it's worth. I think those moments had a lot stolen from them because I was still in that zone of uncertainty, and that took away from some of the joy. That took away from some of the enthusiastic enjoyment of those moments. So going forward now, as I reflect on those past spontaneous experiences, in the future when I have those opportunities again, I'm going to be a lot more hell yes response, right? And giving myself permission, saying, this is an amazing decision. There's nothing wrong with this decision, and I'm going to enjoy it a lot more as I go forward. So those are some of the reflections that I have that helped me. I'd love to hear your comments of your experiences. Thanks for those who have shared. I will see you guys tomorrow for episode 90. Have a great Thursday. Love you guys.